Ladies and gentlemen, hello there. You are watching L24 Midnight News streaming live from the capital Algiers, and to the headlines. The personal envoy of the Secretary General for Western Sahara, Staffan de Mistura, is holding informal bilateral consultations in New York with the representatives of the two parties to the conflict. And after President Joe Biden criticized Zionist Prime Minister, saying he won't be getting an invitation to the White House anytime soon, tensions between the United States and the Zionist entity flared up. Iran's foreign minister reiterated that normalization of relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia is a step forward. China threatens retaliation on Wednesday if U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy meets with Taiwan's president during her upcoming trip through Los Angeles. Hello again and welcome. First, the personal envoy of the Secretary General for Western Sahara, Staffan de Mistura, is holding informal bilateral consultations with the representatives of the two parties to the conflict in New York. The spokesman of the UN Secretary General, Stephane Dujarric, confirmed that informal bilateral consultations will also include the two neighboring countries, namely Algeria and Mauritania, as well as members of the Group of Friends of Western Sahara, before presenting his briefing to the Security Council next April.
I have been asked over the last few weeks for updates regarding the activities of Staffan de Mistura, the personal envoy of the Secretary General for Western Sahara. I can tell you that he has been having meetings here at UN headquarters. Mr. de Mistura has invited the representatives in New York of Morocco, the Frente Polisario, Algeria and Mauritania, as well as members of the Group of Friends of Western Sahara, that is namely France, the Russian Federation, Spain and the United Kingdom and the United States, to informal bilateral consultations with him ahead of his bi-yearly briefing to the Security Council that will take place next.
Also, Mr. Stephane Dujarric indicated that the personal envoy of the Secretary General for Western Sahara, Staffan de Mistura, expressed hope that a just and lasting political solution likely to guarantee the right of the Sahrawi people to self-determination could be reached.
In his invitation letters to this week's meetings, Mr. de Mistura said he remained hopeful that a just, lasting and mutually acceptable political solution which will provide for the self-determination of the people of Western Sahara in accordance with relevant Security Council resolutions was achievable. The personal envoy indicated that the purpose of this informal bilateral consultations would be to discuss lessons learned from the political process, to deepen the examination of the positions, and to continue seeking mutually agreeable formulas to advance the political process.
Amnesty International indicated in its 2022 report on the situation of human rights in the world that Moroccan forces used excessive force several times to suppress peaceful demonstration calling for protection of rights of Sahrawi people and arrest some protesters. Mohammed Khatou.
Despite the Moroccan occupation's attempts to cover up the violations committed against the Sahrawi people, Amnesty International reveals each time what the occupation is committing against the Sahrawi activists in the occupied cities, especially the repression they face from the security forces.
Morocco continues its attacks against Sahrawi activists in the occupied Sahrawi cities, as demonstrations staged by Sahrawi activists in Western Sahara were subjected to big violence.
In a detailed report, Amnesty International revealed some of the events that activists were subjected to, such as student Abdelmun'im al-Nasiri, who lost consciousness under the torture of the Moroccan security forces in April 2022, after he documented a sit-in organized by Sahrawi youth, in addition to the Moroccan occupation's use of sexual harassment against activists who expressed their solidarity with activist and human rights defender Sultana Khaya a practice quickly condemned by the United Nations rapporteur.
In April 2022, the Special UN Charter related to the status of human rights defenders condemned the use by the Moroccan authorities of sexual violence to frighten Sahrawi human rights defenders.
Amnesty International's annual report did not stop there. After a chronological presentation of events, the organization wonders why the Moroccan occupation has escaped punishment.
The Moroccan authorities committed torture in detention centers and other ill-treatment acts in all impunity, especially against Sahrawi activists.
The Moroccan occupation forces continue their exactions against Sahrawi activists before NGOs and the international community, and in violation of international resolutions and human rights principles.
Here in Algeria, attempts to smuggle in more than 18 quintals of processed cannabis through the borders with Morocco were thwarted and 65 drug traffickers arrested in operations carried out throughout the country's military regions during the period from March 22 to March 28, according to an operational report released Wednesday by the Ministry of National Defense. The operations were held as part of the fight against organized crime and in adherence with the persistent efforts aimed at countering the scourge of drug trafficking in our country. Algerian Foreign Minister Ahmed Attaf reviewed with his Italian counterpart Antonio Tajani the progress made towards deepening the relations of friendship and cooperation between Algeria and Italy. According to a statement by the Algerian Foreign Ministry on Wednesday, Minister Attaf discussed in a phone call with his Italian counterpart issues of common interests of both countries based on respect for international legitimacy and mutual aspiration for stability and prosperity, especially in the Maghreb region and in Africa. In Africa still, the Mauritanian Independent Election Commission has begun accepting candidacy files for the country's parliamentary elections on May 30th. A total of 25 political parties will be competing for 176 parliamentary seats in the election, marking the country's first legislative elections under President Mohamed Ould Sheikh Al Ghazouani. The Burkinabe army has announced the neutralization of a group of terrorists in airstrikes on the border with Mali. The operation targeted a terrorist stronghold in Sinro and resulted in the destruction of military and logistical equipment. Further strikes and ground operations will continue to eliminate terrorists in the area. Now, in the Middle East, a Palestinian was wounded by the Zionist occupation forces bullets early morning on Wednesday during their raid into Askar refugee camp east of Nablus in the occupied West Bank. Meanwhile, local sources reported that large forces of the occupation army stormed the vicinity of Eastern Cemetery in the city of Nablus and arrested 3 other young Palestinians from their homes. Benjamin Netanyahu's attempt to overhaul Zionist judicial system has triggered a backlash among some of the country's most ardent supporters in the U.S. Straining supporters, or rather support that has been at the core of its security strategy for decades. More later.
A new crisis hits the Zionist entity. In addition to protests against Netanyahu's unilateral decision, tensions seem to be mounting between the Zionist prime minister and U.S. president after the latter criticized Netanyahu's judicial overhaul. In response to the U.S. comments, Netanyahu said that his country is sovereign and does not make decisions based on pressure from abroad. National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, along with many other Zionist politicians, rejected U.S. interference. Ben-Gvir made it clear that the entity will not be another star on the U.S. flag and that his country is independent. The frosty exchange between the Zionist leader and Biden was a rare bout of public disagreement between the two close allies and signals building friction between Zionist entity and the United States. Biden said he was not interfering, but he seemed to brim with skepticism when he referred to Netanyahu's apparent attempts now to reach a compromise over the plans. Later on Wednesday, Benjamin Netanyahu struck a more conciliatory tone, saying despite occasional differences with the US, the alliance between them was unshakable. Yet, his double statements show a strained US Zionist ties looming on the horizon. Biden is a strongly pro-Zionist Democrat, but Netanyahu has a checkered past with him due to the anger sparked in the Obama administration when the Zionist leader tried to derail the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. The Netanyahu's bid to append the judiciary has unleashed widespread protests across the country and led to a flood of warnings from experts who say the proposals will damage the entity's democracy and economy alike.
Iran's Foreign Minister Hussein Amir Abdullahian said on Wednesday that the normalization of relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia was a step forward. This was made in a statement made by Abdullahian at a joint press conference with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in the Russian capital Moscow.
Improving relations with our neighbors is part of our faith, and normalizing relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia is a step forward in this direction. Accelerating relations between Riyadh and Tehran needs some time, and there are still problems. There are no obstacles to the progress of the talks.
In the same context, during the same meeting, the Russian top diplomat Sergei Lavrov underlined that his country agreed that there were no alternatives to joint comprehensive plan of action, also known as the Iran nuclear deal, and that accord needs to be implemented as soon as possible.
We talked about the situation around the JCPOA on the Iranian nuclear program. We have a common understanding that there is no alternative to this international agreement, which was written down in the unanimously adopted UN Security Council Resolution 2231. We are in favor of the early resumption of the full implementation of this resolution and oppose actions that prevent this.
Iran Foreign Minister Hussein Amir Abdullahian said Wednesday that his country believes that the West complicates the situation in Ukraine by shipping weapons to Kiev.
The fact that Western states arm Ukraine, we believe that this complicates the situation. We welcome any initiative that would contribute to peace settlement of tensions.
Within the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, now it is escalation with the deployment of hundreds of modern tanks by both sides. The Russian army announced the entry of these tanks for use on the battlefield, following a similar announcement from Kiev a few hours earlier. Hussein Burkan.
With the fighting between the Russian forces and Ukrainian counterparts intensifying, both sides have been depleting their stocks of weapons and ammunition. The entry of modern tanks into conflict is a significant move, with Russia placing a bet on their superiority in combat characteristics over those owned by the Ukrainian forces. The Kremlin has stated that this conflict is part of a broader confrontation with the hostile states, including what it calls a hybrid war being waged against it by the West, and that it will last for a long time.
If you are referring to the war in a broader context, it is a confrontation with hostile states, a hybrid war against our country, then it's going to last for a long time. And here we need to be resolute and self-confident and to consolidate around the president.
On the Eastern Front in Bakhmut, the situation remains difficult and dynamic, with the Ukrainian Deputy Minister of Defense claiming that Russia is trying to portray Bakhmut battle as a horrific event. Meanwhile, the Russian forces have made tactical progress, according to the spokesman for the Ukrainian forces in the east. The Kremlin's stance suggests that any hope for a peaceful settlement of the conflict is unlikely. Russian officials maintain that achieving the objectives of the military operation in Ukraine through political and diplomatic channels is impossible. They also criticize the West's mobilization of military supplies to Kiev, claiming that it may lead to disastrous results.
But in the same matter, President Volodymyr Zelensky has warned of the consequences of a defeat in Bakhmut and invited the Chinese president to visit Kiev. He stated that if Ukraine does not achieve victory, Russia will mobilize international support to force the country into making unacceptable concessions.
Yes, he will sell this victory. He will sell this victory to West, to his society, to China, to Iran, to all the countries, to Brazil, to Latin America countries, not to Latvia, Litva, Estonia. Of course, they really understand, from details, and they feel this dangerous because they neighbors. But he will sell it to his society. That was the first step. Now, wait a minute. I will have decision with Ukraine. Then another step.
Russian President Vladimir Putin confirmed that his country's economy is showing positive dynamics, including development of vacant areas from which Western companies have withdrawn. Putin also said that the country's manufacturing sector was still sluggish, warning that sanctions could have negative impact on the economy in the medium terms, while he expected inflation to fall below 4% by the end of the month.
The Russian economy, since July last year, has demonstrated positive dynamics, including due to businesses' development in niche areas formed by Western companies in our market, at the expense of those who left our market. Also, thanks to the active development of ties with rapidly growing countries of the East and South.
China threatened retaliation on Wednesday if U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy meets with Taiwan's president during her upcoming trip to the United States. The planned meeting has triggered fears of Chinese reaction amid heightened friction between Beijing and Washington. Nabil Khazini.
It is true that this is not her first visit to the United States, but this one comes at a sensitive time in already strained US-China relations, and where China firmly opposes any form of official interaction between the US and Taiwan. The scheduled transit of Tsai Ing-wen in the US has attracted heightened attention in particularly special circumstances following reports that Tsai would meet US Speaker Kevin McCarthy in California. For Beijing, such a meeting would be another provocation that needs retaliatory acts.
Should the leader of Taiwan engage with the Congress Speaker McCarthy during her transit in the U.S., it will be another provocation that seriously violates the One China principle, damages China's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and undermines peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. We firmly oppose this and will take resolute countermeasures to fight back.
The US believes there is absolutely no reason for Beijing to use Tsai's visit as an excuse to carry out what Washington calls aggressive or coercive activities aimed at Taiwan. China strongly opposes these transits, arguing that they are violations of the One China principle and an attempt to propagate Taiwan independence. But the United States has a different viewpoint.
The U.S. opposes any unilateral changes to the status quo by either side, and we do not support Taiwan independence, and we expect cross-strait differences to be resolved by peaceful means.
In the past, China has enacted a wide range of punitive measures against Taiwan and the United States. After such visits, like the one of Nancy Pelosi, the then U.S. House Speaker, who so angered Beijing after she landed on Taipei's airport, which in response organized large-scale military exercises around the island.
And from Taiwan to Europe again, French Prime Minister Elisabeth Borne called for finding solutions to the tension in her country. Outside the vision, Borne, in a speech before the Senate on Wednesday, revealed that she had launched a series of consultations with various political and social parties, including trade unions, confirming the invitation to a meeting next week as part of an effort to contain the crisis left by the adoption of the amendments to retirement system.
Ma conviction aujourd'hui
My conviction today is that we must not seek to foster fears and stir up anger. We must appease the country by bringing together people of goodwill who are willing to find solutions for the country beyond its divisions. We must not give up action. On the contrary, we must hurry up and provide concrete answers that improve the daily lives of the French people. Today, around these two axes, I would like to build a governmental program in the coming weeks and a legislative agenda, as the President of the Republic entrusted me with this task. So, I started a series of consultations. Yesterday I saw the Speaker of the Senate and the Speaker of the National Assembly, political forces, parliamentarians, local elected officials and social partners, whom I have invited to a meeting early next week.
Britain's King Charles arrived at Berlin-Brandenburg Airport in Germany on Wednesday as part of efforts to turn the page on years of rocky relations between Britain and European Union after its exit from the bloc. The British monarch was expected to visit France, but his trip was cancelled due to the protests that ravaged the country. The king is scheduled to give a speech to the Bundestag, Germany's parliament, on Thursday. He will also meet Chancellor Olaf Scholz, talk to Ukrainian refugees and meet with British and German military personnel who are working together on joint projects. And now for more international news, let's follow this roundup by Islamsi.
Angry migrants and activists gathered outside the migration station in Ciudad Juarez to demand justice for the detainees killed in a migrant detention center in the Mexican northern border city. At least 40 migrants died after a fire broke out late Monday due to protests over deportation. A wildfire ravaged through a mountain in Thailand's Khao Laim National Park on Wednesday. The mountain was covered alight at night. Local sources believe that thunder strikes and strong winds which hit the area on Tuesday might have caused the wild blaze. Head of the UN nuclear watchdog visited Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station in southeastern Ukraine as part of efforts to avert the risk of an atomic accident. Rafael Grossi met with Russian officials to assess the nuclear safety and security situation and press on with efforts to broker a deal to protect the plant. House Democrats urge House Republicans to move on gun legislation after another school shooting took place in Nashville this week. Outrage sparked among House Democrats towards their Republican colleagues that have gone against firearm regulations.
Coming back to the country, a delegation of experts from African Football Federation (CAF) arrived in Algiers on Wednesday morning with the aim of taking stock and inspecting the Nelson Mandela Stadium in Baraki as part of the working committee in charge of examining the candidacy files to host the 2025 African Cup of Nations. Nelson Mandela Stadium is considered one of the most important stadiums in the file submitted by Algeria to host the continental tournament for the second time after the first edition in 1990, when Algeria won its first title, while its second title was snatched in the 2019 edition held in Egypt. With this sport news, we reach the end of our news bulletin. Thank you ever so much for being with us. For more updates, you can follow our social media platform. And all I can say at the end, لكم and good night.